Hello everybody, Jade Hamilton here. I'm so sorry I haven't posted yet this week, but I'm still getting used to my new computer, and I also have had some issues with my teeth, so I've been in a little bit of discomfort, but I am coming on this afternoon. I'm sorry, I know I'm a few days late, but I'm coming on to join in Whatever I Want Monday with Dee at the Baby Patch and Toddler Tuesday, which this week is hosted by Maddie at Mandy's Cuddlebug Nursery. First of all, we've got Miss Maddie. Miss Maddie is in this beautiful striped yellow romper. It's originally from Monsoon. I got it from a store on eBay called Tiny Tots Pre-Loved. Really good store. I really recommend it, especially for you guys who have got bigger babies, who take, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9, whatever it is. I'm particularly thinking of Jay, my lovely friend Jay at J Dolls UK, who's got lots and lots of babies and lots of different sizes. And Tiny Tots Pre-Loved are really good. Their clothing's really cheap. They can buy them postage. And they're just really lovely people to deal with. Maddie's got on this, as I say, this gorgeous lemon and white striped romper that is a 0 to 3 month size. I didn't realise it was strappy. If I'd realised it was strappy, I'd have put a vest under. But I didn't, so never mind. It's got these beautiful bright pink tropical flowers on it, and these beautiful variegated green leaves. There's also white floral patterns and bits of blue as well. It looks absolutely gorgeous on her. And for Toddler Tuesday, Maddie also counts because of her bib. She's got a beautiful pink and silver bib on with a white background that says sweet and snuggly, cute and cuddly. So that's her warning label, as Maddie put it. And we've also got Mr. Jack here. Now Jack is wearing a beautiful blue and white striped romper from Blue Zoo. Originally I got it from a store called Beach Warehouse, I think it's called, on eBay, and it says in big letters on the front, "I love my daddy." And Jack is a total daddy's boy. He likes me well enough, but Daddy is the king as far as Jack is concerned. So he's got his I love my daddy romper on. I love this romper. It's 0 to 3 months size again. It's got zebras appliqued onto it, and the word daddy is appliqued across it in beautiful rainbow letters. Jack, of course, absolutely adores this, because anything that references his dad is all right by him, isn't it, Jack? Yeah, that's cool, isn't it? He's also got his ticker bib on. It's a beautiful white blue-edged bib with Tigger on the front, and it says always bouncy, which is also very Jack. because it's very rare I can get Jack to sit still for more than 90 seconds. Because you're an energetic little boy, aren't you? Yeah. So that's Maddie for Whatever I Want Monday with our lovely friend Dee at the Baby Patch, and Jack, and also partially Maddie for Toddler Tuesday, which is hosted by Mandy's Cuddlebug Nursery. And with that note, we are on to our story, which is Charm School by Anne Fine. As per all videos where I read, all copyright goes to Anne Fine and her publisher, which is Penguin Random House. I own absolutely nothing. Make yourself comfortable, grab yourself a drink, make yourself really comfy, grab an extra blanket if you're chilly or a fan if you're hot. I will get the story up and I will see you very shortly. Here we go, gang. We're on chapter 3. So, here we are. Wait a minute. Get rid of this. And let's see where we go. Hold on. Chapter 3. As soon as the door shut behind Araminta, tears sprang to Bonnie's eyes. "That's it," she muttered. "I'm not staying here." "Who sounds like that when he's cross?" "Maddie." "Yeah, your brother can sound a bit like that, can't he, when he's upset?" "Poor Bonnie sounds a bit upset as well." "What's that?" "Araminta's been really mean." "Yes, she has. She's been very mean." So we'll see what happens next. Tugging at the door in her turn, she rushed out in the corridor. Where was her mother? She'd find her if she had to burst into every single room in the building, waking the babies in practical parenting and setting pens skidding in copperplate handwriting. Hurrying round the corner, she bumped into Toby and his trolley. "I've got something for you," he said, holding out one of her favourite Scooby-Doo biscuits. The stars and the wrapper winked at her temptingly, but Bonnie was in no mood to be cheered by treats. "I don't want it," she said. "I can't pay for it anyway." "It's already paid for," he told her, thrusting it into her hand, and it was only then that she noticed the rubber band round it, holding in the folded note. "For sale, 1 whole day in ghastly, difficult, slave driving, no breaks, bookkeeping advanced. We'll swap for 1 day being charming. Roll on 5 p.m. Love, Mum." Bonnie unwrapped the Scooby-Doo and took a massive bite. "Thanks," she said when her mouth emptied. "I really, really needed that." "I know," said Toby, and Bonnie noticed he was looking at the note in her hand, not the chocolate bar wrapper. She guessed he'd seen her tears. She didn't care, though. She felt so much better, good enough to grin at him cheerfully as he gave her a ride on his trolley back to her little room. If she was the meanest girl Araminta had ever seen, Bonnie couldn't help thinking an hour or so later, it was against some pretty stiff competition. In between 5-minute visits from each of Mrs. Opperline's superstars, explaining exactly what it was she wanted later in the Curls and Pearls show. Bonnie switched up some of the microphones dangling from the ceiling in the big mirrored room and found herself overhearing one catty conversation after another. Take Miss Stardust and Miss Rosebud. They both seemed nice enough when they were in with Bonnie, but as Serena walked past in the big room, they wrinkled their noses. Curious, Bonnie turned up the microphones over their heads. Pooh! What's that awful smell? So sickly, with just a touch of flower stalks rotting in a vase. I wonder where it's coming from. Miss Stardust suddenly pretended to notice Serena glaring. Oh, golly, she said. Is it your perfume, Serena? I had no idea. I'm sorry if Esmeralda and I upset you. Yes, so sorry, chortled Esmeralda. She turned to Miss Stardust. We think it's a nice smell, really. Don't you, Angelica? Oh, yes, said Angelica in a voice that meant as clear as paint. Oh, no, we don't. Really, we think it smells about as pleasant as fresh manure. But Serena was already hurrying to the corner of the room, where she stood, looking angry and upset, before turning to Pearl, who was standing beside her in a faded old slip, unzipping her big plastic dress bag. Bonnie switched over to the microphone above Pearl's head. Pearl, she heard Serena say, that's the nicest dress you've ever worn to charm school. Pearl looked up, baffled. But you haven't seen it yet. I'm only just getting it out now. Serena's voice dripped with false innocence. Isn't that it? Isn't that it? What you're wearing? This? Pearl stared down at the faded, raggedy old slip in which she stood. This is some old thing I borrowed from my mum because it doesn't show round the neck when I'm wearing my new outfit. Really? Serena clapped her hands over her mouth and acted horrified. Oh, I am sorry. I thought it must be your new frock. Pearl plucked at it, horrified. You didn't mean that, did you? You didn't really think that this was the nicest dress I'd ever worn? Her face was crumpling with unhappiness. Of course not, said Serena, in a voice that clearly meant, oh, yes, I did, but I'd better not admit it. It was, thought Bonnie, exactly the same mean trick to make someone feel bad as that Angelica and Esmeralda had just played on Serena herself. Would Pearl catch on and tell Serena off for spitefulness? Or would she run in tears to dear, kind, marshmallow-hearted Mrs. Opaline? Surely she'd care if all her precious, charming girls began to claw at each other like cats in a sack. But Mrs. Opaline was busy sewing up a fallen length of Cristal's hem, while comforting weeping Amethyst about a fleck of white in one of her perfect fingernails. So all Pearl did was drift away from Serena, looking very unhappy. Bonnie's eyes followed her across the room. till she came to a halt behind Cookie. For a while, Pearl stood watching Cookie brushing her hair in front of the long, wide mirror. Then she said kindly, "Never mind, no one will notice." Anxiously, Cookie spun round. "No one will notice what?" "Your hair." "What's wrong with it?" Again, that same wide-eyed stare and pretend voice of innocence. Nothing at all. Forget I said anything. Doesn't matter." Cookie turned back to the mirror. "Yes, it does. I want to know what you meant. What can you see? What's gone wrong with my hair at the back there?" "Nothing, I told you, but you just said..." "Honestly, Cookie," Pearl interrupted her sweetly, "it looks wonderful, especially from the back." But even from the glass panel, through the glass panel, Bonnie could see the little smile on Pearl's face that clearly meant, "But I'm just saying that, it doesn't really." And Cookie saw it too. "It doesn't, does it? It looks silly or wrong or something." Cookie was panicking. "What is it, Pearl? Tell me." "It's nothing, honestly." And off floated Pearl, leaving poor Cookie staring in the mirror in dismay. Bonnie felt like rushing out of the control room to slap Pearl hard. But then it would only be fair to go and slap Serena too for upsetting Pearl, and after that she should go after Esmeralda and Angelica for starting the whole thing off. What was the matter with them all? The children in Bonnie's first playgroup when she was 3 had all behaved better than this. And what would Mrs. Opaline think of? What was Mrs. Opaline thinking of? Caring more about fallen hems and fingernails than about them all roaming around being hateful to one another. Was this what she meant by having to suffer to be beautiful? But why would it help to have everyone around you feeling totally crummy? Unless, of course, it was some horrible way of passing the unhappiness on, like a plate that was too hot to hold. It couldn't simply be to do with wanting to be the supreme queen and walk off the stage covered with the glistering tiara. Bonnie had been in plenty of competitions. There had been the canoe race at club camp, and the climb a rope contest at the sports centre, and even that poetry speaking final in the school hall. Admittedly, nobody burst into tears of grief, into noisy sobs of grief when George's canoe rolled over, tipping him into the water on the last bend, and she doubted if anyone was really very sorry when in the rope climb Gillian lost her nerve and her grip at the same time and cascaded down the rope to the floor. And everyone burst out laughing when Martin forgot the last line of his poem and just stared bleakly into space. But no one had gone around beforehand trying to make that sort of thing happen. No one had taken the time to think up ways of making all the others lose their confidence before things even got started. Perhaps they'd all been too busy. After all, canoeing and climbing ropes and learning poetry so use up your energy and take up time. But things were very different here in Charm School. The problem with trying to win the glistering tiara was that you weren't kept busy actually doing things. You were just trying to be graceful, be ladylike, be more beautiful, to end up being the supreme queen. So they had too much time to stand and fret. There was Serena, wrinkling her nose over and over, as if she was still trying to work out if her perfume really did smell like rotting flower stalks. Pearl was fingering her new frock, clearly still wondering if Serena would think it was as horrible as all her other ones. And Cookie, worried stiff, couldn't stop craning to see the back of her head in the mirror. Bonnie was really relieved when Mrs. Opaline stepped up to the microphone and called them all back to their places in the circle. As Araminta tripped daintily across the room towards her seat, Bonnie held up the shawl to remind her she'd left it. She didn't want to admit it to herself, but she was really hoping that Araminta would rush back just for a moment to fetch it and make peace. But Araminta just glanced coldly in her direction and then turned away. And then she crossed the circle to whisper something in Suki's ear. And to Bonnie's embarrassment, Suki too stared coldly at her through the glass. The two of them exchanged places, so Araminta had her back to Bonnie. Bonnie felt terrible. She was quite glad when Mrs. Opaline chided both of them. "Now, hurry up, dears, please. It's time for our precious words about beauty." Everyone looked delighted. "Oh, goody!" trilled Amethyst. "I love words about beauty." "Who'd like to start?" asked Mrs. Opaline. "Who's found some lovely and inspirational words they'd like to share?" "I have," said Esmeralda. She stood up, clasped her hands and cocked her head winsomely to the side and started declaiming, "My evening star, Laura, your beauty shines as far as yon dark whispering pines." "Enchanting!" cried Mrs. Opaline, clasping her own hands to her glittering bosom. "Enchanting! Can I go next?" begged Cristal. "I have 2 lines from a lovely poem we did at school." Like Esmeralda, she clasped her hands before saying it aloud. "My lady is a jewel, her pretty eyes sparkle as on her velvet couch she lies." "Oh!" Mrs. Opaline's rings flashed as she fluttered her hand over her heart. "Oh, that is nice. My lady's a jewel. Isn't that nice, girls? Don't you all agree?" Everyone nodded. Cookie's hand went up. "I've just remembered one." Making sure her knees were together and her feet tucked away neatly, she laid her hands on her lap and flicked her hair back, just like Amethyst. "Oh, Flora, so well named, you are a beauteous flower, shimmering in loveliness through every shower." "Shimmering in loveliness," repeated Mrs. Opaline. "Doesn't everyone think that's beautiful? I think that's quite inspiring. Thank you, Quickie dear. Now who else has a little gem to offer?" "I do," said Cindy Lou, jumping to her feet. "I found it in a book of verses my granny gave me." "Lovely, dear." Cindy Lou spread her hands and quoted, "She walks in beauty like the night." "Oh, oh!" cried Mrs. Opaline.
Oh, cried Mrs. Opperlin, she seemed to Bonnie to be in the seventh heaven of delight. Oh, how would we all like to hear someone saying that of us? She walks in beauty like the night. Wouldn't that be something lovely to aim for? Thank you so much, Cindy Lou, for sharing that with us. Now, who would like to be next? She was still looking hopefully around the circle when Bonnie's voice resounded through the loudspeaker. So where was she going? Hearing her own voice booming back at her, Bonnie clapped her hands over her mouth. She hadn't meant to speak aloud, let alone with her own microphone channeled through to the big room. But now Mrs. Opperling was peering, a little baffled, towards the glass window. Is that you, Miss Sparky? Do you have a question? Well, Bonnie thought, my mother did buy a ticket. I do have a right to ask one and to get an answer. I was just wondering where she was going, she told Mrs. Opperling. Mrs. Opperling was baffled. Who, dear? This woman walking in beauty. Liddy, I think, dear, Mrs. Opperling reproved her. And what does it matter where she was going? I was just interested, Bonnie defended herself. Perhaps Cindy Lou knows. Cindy Lou didn't. The poet doesn't say. He just goes on a bit about how beautiful she was while she was walking there. He doesn't say where she was going or why. Shame, Bonnie muttered. I started out quite liking that one, but that makes it quite as boring as all the others. Everyone stared. Shocked to the core, Mrs. Opperling gathered the floaty matching wrap of her gown closer around her shoulders, as if a chill wind had run through the room. Sorry, dear, did I mishear? Could I possibly have heard you see the word boring about our lovely inspirational words about beauty? Now, the line that Cindy Lou quoted just now, for any of you poem fans and fact fans out there, is a line from a poem by the famous literary bad boy Henry Lord Byron. I say he was a bad boy because he had lots and lots of girlfriends, and he wasn't a particularly nice guy to be around always. So much so that one of his exes referred to him as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. So I don't think Mrs. Opperling would really approve of that line, had she known what kind of person it came from originally. I don't think she'd approve of Byron somehow. Although he did have, a taste for very beautiful dark-haired women, so possibly, I don't know. He once described his fellow romantic poet, John Keats's poetry, as poetry for bedwetters. So that's the kind of maturity we're dealing with here. Anyway. Well, yes, admitted Bonnie, wishing to heaven she'd kept her mouth shut. Excuse me a minute, folks. I'm just going to pause you again for a second.
sorry folks, Maddie and Jack were both getting fussy, so I popped them down for a nap. It's very hot and sticky where I am today, and I think the heat was getting to them a little bit. Anyway, where were we? Well, yes, admitted Bonnie, wishing to heaven that she'd kept her mouth shut. Beauty that shines like a star, reverberated through Mrs. Opperline as though the switches on the sound panel would all push themselves up to full. Eyes that sparkle like jewels, flowers that shiver in loveliness. You call those, her bosom trembled, boring. Bonnie was trembling too now, but still she tried to explain. I didn't mean to be rude. It's just that none of those things that the poets are writing about actually do anything, do they? What do you mean none of them do anything? Well, they don't, Bonnie said stoutly. None of them. Flowers and jewels and stars. They just sit there looking pretty, all twinkling and twinkling and glowing. That's all they do. And it must be terribly boring. But they're beautiful. Oh, yes, said Bonnie. I agree they're all nice to look at. What I'm saying is that it's probably a lot more fun to look at them than to be them. They were all staring at her, open-mouthed. After all, Bonnie finished up determinedly, even the lady who could walk in beauty like the night couldn't have been going anywhere very interesting, or the poet would have mentioned it. She was about to switch off the microphone and get on reading the Handbook of Sound and Lighting she'd found in a heap of cassette tapes, when Sarah Jane spoke up. Well, obviously the lady couldn't have been going anywhere very exciting, or she wouldn't have stayed looking nice. That's right, said Pearl. If she'd been climbing up mountains, she'd have got all sweaty. And if she'd been at a fun fair, her hair would have been blown about, said Crystal. And if she'd been on a beach, her makeup would have melted and smudged, put in Suki. They were all at it now. You can't do very much at all if you want to stay walking in beauty. No, you certainly can't. You might get grubby, or leather your tights, or break a fingernail, or get stains on your blouse, or scuff your heels, or... Just as, exasperated, Bonnie reached to fade out this catalogue of woes, a hand came down to stop her. It was Toby, who'd once again slid in silently and was standing behind her. Oh, don't turn 'em off, he begged. I'm listening. This is more exciting than any adventure story. What else could possibly go wrong with their poor clothes? He pushed Bonnie's fingers so the volume shot up again. All the pleats in your skirt might fall out, Angelica was threatening. Or you might lose one of your earrings, warned Amethyst. Or your hem might... But Bonnie couldn't stand it. Jerking her hand under his, she cut Cookie off in mid-wail and swung round to face them. Is it time for lunch yet? She asked hopefully. Nearly. I just came by to pick up your teacup. Their hands collided on the way to pick it up. The cup
spun off the ledge, splashing dregs on his jeans. Clutching his head, the tea boy reeled dramatically round the little back room. "Oh no!" he shrilled. "A spot on me pretty trousers. Now I shall have to go all the way home and change, and I'll be late for the party." Seeing Bonnie giggle, he stopped, satisfied, and rubbed the dregs of tea into his trousers, where they disappeared. "Good colour, Gray," he said. "Hides everything." He nodded through the glass window. "Not like all those girly lemons and pinks. Men do wear yellow shirts," argued Bonnie, "and pink ones, but they don't have to go with anything. When one gets dirty, you just pull the next one out of the cupboard. You don't have to waste half your life standing in front of the mirror worrying." He plucked at his shirt, the shirt he was wearing, and squeaked at Bonnie. "Now tell me the truth. Does this shirt look exactly right? Does the green go with the grey in my trousers?" "Everything goes with grey," Bonnie said. But he wasn't listening. He was still doing his imitation. "No, don't spare the feelings. If they're not an absolute match, I'll try around 20 shops till I find a colour that's perfect." 20 shops is nothing," scoffed Bonnie. "Suki in there went round 40 to find the right choker." "Really?" The tea boy peered at Suki through the glass. "I think I'd just pick the one I like best in the first shop, then go off fishing. So would my dad," said Bonnie. "Mum says that's why men's clothes are always the first thing you come to in big stores. If you had to drag them any further, they wouldn't go." "Too busy," said Toby. "Better things to do than trail round shopping every time the fashions change." He picked up the microphone and pretended to make a news announcement. "To no one's astonishment, men's favourite trouser colours will remain the same, easy to match, stain hiding, dark range, and their favourite hems will stay at ankle length for yet another season." He grinned at Bonnie. "And believe me," he added, "no one will even notice. Unless you forget to put them on." "Oh, yes." He snatched up Araminta's shawl. "Or if they're all spangly like this." Swirling it round, he held it flat against his body. "Toby, the glittering man!" "Very flash," said Bonnie, thinking how odd he looked. When Araminta wore the shawl, she just looked special, all dressed up and fancy. But Toby immediately looked like a clown, or an actor in a pantomime, or the comedy star of some Christmas variety spectacular. Bonnie was used to seeing women glitter. Just look at Mrs. Opaline. But men don't go around glittering unless they're inviting you to share a laugh. No one takes seriously someone who is twinkling. Bonnie realised for the first time why lawyers and bankers went to work in sober suits, and police officers and traffic wardens wore dark uniforms. It would be hard to pay them nearly so much attention if they were dressed in frothy clothes with flashy rhinestone earrings. Trousers that twinkle say only, "Look at me." Plain suits and shirts and jackets, like Mrs. Sullivan's at school, say, "Now listen carefully, this is important," or the spell was clearly working overtime, because the next thing Bonnie heard Toby say was, "Hey, you're not listening." No, sorry, Bonnie said. I was too busy watching you twinkle. Just in case anybody was wondering, the Christmas Variety Spectacular that Bonnie mentions, variety is what we in the UK call vaudeville. So comedians and jugglers and all that sort of thing. People going on stage and doing, little acts, little turns. We don't do a lot of variety in the UK anymore, but around Christmas or sometimes New Year, or there's a thing called the Royal Variety Performance every year where various famous people come on and they do a turn in front of the royal family, as well as a big audience, to raise money for various charities. What I was saying, repeated Toby, draping Araminta's shawl over the chair, is that lunch will be ready in 5 minutes. Goody, I'm starving. I'll be first in the queue. Which queue? He asked. The queue for the smallest heap of beans? Or the thinnest slice of bread? Or the tiniest dab of butter? Don't they even eat at meal times? Eat, Toby said. Eat? Oh, you'll see one or two of them pushing the odd shred of lettuce around their plates and nibbling at stalks of celery. You might even spot one or two of them looking longingly at a sliver of grilled fish, or gingerly dipping her spoon into a tiny tub of non-fat, low-calorie yoghurt. But what you and I would call eating? Nah, you won't see any of that. They will, though, Bonnie said dryly. They'll see me. They didn't simply see. They sat and stared. All except Araminta, who stood as far away from Bonnie as she could in the long canteen queue, then took a seat at the far end of the table. None of the rest of them could take their eyes off Bonnie's double slice of pizza and her tossed salad. Bonnie took her first mouthfuls and looked round in the hope of seeing her mother, but clearly the victims of bookkeeping advanced were kept miserably hungry, as well as horribly busy. And anyway, Pearl was tapping her on her sleeve. You do realise, she was saying kindly, that the dressing you've put on your salad is mostly oil? Bonnie gave it some thought. I can taste vinegar in it, she said, after a moment, and a little bit of garlic. Yes, chimed in Cindy Lou, but Pearl is right, it's mostly oil. Bonnie was mystified. What's wrong with that? Olive oil tastes nice, and it's good for you. Sorry, I should have put in this content warning at the head of time. There will be a lot of references in this bit of the chapter to disordered eating and negative comments around food and calories and things. So if that's upsetting to anybody and you need to skip ahead, please do. I wouldn't want to upset anyone in any way. Anyway, Bonnie was mystified. What's wrong with that? Olive oil tastes nice and it's good for you. It's 150 calories a tablespoonful, said Cristal firmly, as if that settled the matter. Simply to keep the peace, Bonnie shifted her fork across to her pizza. Suki's mouth dropped open. Are you really going to eat that? She couldn't help asking. Yes, Bonnie stared at her. That's why I took it. Now everyone was chiming in. All of it, both slices, as well as the salad dressing. How? Those croutons look to me as if they're fried, added Cristal, as if the word meant poisonous. Bonnie tried to ignore them all. Keeping her head down, she watched the food on her own plates. Toby was right. All they seemed to do was shuffle it round and round, making a giant great fuss of it, but never actually putting any of it in their mouths. Bonnie watched, fascinated, as Esmeralda made a great show of reaching for a slice of bread, then unwrapping her butter pat. It took her 20 times as long as it would have taken Bonnie to peel the shiny foil off the tiny yellow square and fold the foil up neatly. Then Esmeralda picked up her knife and started to mash the butter on her plate. What are you doing? Just softening the butter? Why? It spreads better, said Esmeralda, and thinner too. Bonnie watched Esmeralda smear the tiniest fraction of butter onto her bread and make a great display of spreading it around, though there was so little of it, it was practically invisible. Aren't you using the rest up? Gosh, no! Esmeralda looked horrified. This is tons. She still wasn't actually eating it. Now she was neatly cutting the slice into quarters, and after that each quarter into strips, and then she trimmed the crust off one by one. Then she trimmed each crust off one by one. Anyone glancing at her would be left with the impression that she was bent over her plate, tucking in happily. But she still hadn't eaten anything. Bonnie leaned over the table and tapped her fork beside Esmeralda's plate. In a nannyish voice, she said to her, "Stop playing with your food, dear." Esmeralda looked up startled. "What do you mean?" "Just what I say," said Bonnie, still in her nanny voice. "Stop messing and eat it." "I am eating," said Esmeralda. "No, you're not," Bonnie said, going back to her normal voice to explain what she meant. "What you're doing is shunting and mashing and smearing and slicing, but you're not actually eating anything. So apart from the fact that you're doing it so daintily, you're just messing with your food like a giant great baby." Esmeralda went scarlet. "I am not. I am eating. I've eaten tons." "What? Tell us what." "I ate most of the lettuce and the fish cake and the beans." "You didn't eat the fish cake," Susie said. "You hid it under the lettuce with the beans." Bonnie reached over and lifted Esmeralda's lettuce with her fork. Esmeralda brushed at the evidence displayed around the table, but several of the others were blushing too. Bonnie turned to her right and lifted Amethyst's largest lettuce leaf with her fork. Out popped 2 fish fingers and some mushrooms. She turned to her left, and Serena snatched her plate away. "It's none of your business. You have to eat," said Bonnie. If you don't eat, your brain doesn't work properly and you get all tearful and crabby. There was a whisper further up the table and everyone giggled. What was that? Said Bonnie. Nothing, said Sarah Jane. Angelica just made a little joke, that's all. No, go on, Bonnie insisted. Bonnie, share the joke. I've forgotten, said Angelica. I haven't, said Serena, getting her own back on Angelica for being so spiteful about the smell of her perfume. She leaned towards Bonnie. When you said people who don't eat get all tearful and crabby, Angelica said, better than getting all fat like her. All fat like who? Everyone was silent. Even Araminta was watching now, and Angelica looked very embarrassed. Bonnie looked down at herself. Do you mean me? Still no one spoke. Bonnie pushed back her chair and looked at herself. She was exactly the same shape she'd been when she left home that morning. She wasn't built from matchsticks, it was true. Her legs weren't thin grass rods. You couldn't have spread your hands round her waist and touched your own fingers. But she wasn't fat. She was perfectly normal. Pushing her chair back even further, Bonnie looked round the table. You should stop worrying about how much you have on your bodies, she told them, and start worrying about how little you have in your heads. No wonder the tea-boy calls you all twinks. Twinks! Toby! They were outraged. Don't listen to her. She's just saying mean things to upset us. Bonnie pointed her finger at Lulu, who was the last to speak. Oh, no, I'm not. Toby agrees with me. He thinks you're all silly and vain. And you are, she added fiercely. You spend your whole lives trailing round shops and parked on your bums, trying to look prettier than the person beside you, and strolling round being spiteful to one another. So why should anyone think you have more than half a brain between you? Now Christelle was shaking her finger back at Bonnie. You're wrong, she snapped. Quite wrong. Toby actually thinks we're something rather special. That's why he spends as much time as he can watching us through the glass window. Oh, no, it's not, said Bonnie. He watches you because he can't get over how daffy you are. How wrong can you get, Miss Clever Sparky? I tell you, Toby likes us. Christelle gave an arch look across the table to Sarah Jane. Especially one of us, she added meaningfully. There does happen to be one of us he really likes. At this, everyone turned to look at Sarah Jane, who blushed bright pink. Bonnie barely noticed. You're the ones who've got it wrong, she was too busy insisting. He doesn't like you at all. You just amuse him. Sarah Jane's blush turned fiery red, and Esmeralda said loudly to no one in particular, talk about people being spiteful. She should try listening to herself. There was another giggle and more whispering at the other end of the table. This time Bonnie was quicker swinging round, and out of the corner of her eye she saw Araminta dart a look at her, then hastily shut her mouth and wipe an amused smile off her face. Bonnie was astonished at how upset she felt, as if a real, true friend had turned against her. She felt tears gathering, and her voice was shaky. "I suppose you're being nasty about me now?" Araminta looked horribly guilty, but it was Lulu at her side who broke the awkward silence, putting on that sugared poison voice Bonnie had heard so often that morning as people said their horrid things. She explained very kindly to Bonnie, "Oh no, Minty was trying to be nice. You see, she was explaining to us why you can't help being so rude and disagreeable. Minty, they all had one another as friends, and she had none. Miserable as could be," Bonnie said crossly. "Oh, really? Why is that then?" As she spoke, she tried looking Araminta straight in the eye, but Araminta hastily stared down at the table. "It doesn't matter," she mumbled very uncomfortably. "I've quite forgotten what I said." Once again, Miss Pass-on-the-Spite Serena pitched in to help someone who'd lost her memory. She leaned over to Bonnie. "I haven't though. Minty was just explaining that you were simply jealous." "Jealous?" Now it was Bonnie's turn to be outraged. "Jealous? Of all you noodle-brain ninnies? Of all you flopsy-mopsy bean brains? Oh, I don't think so." Then suddenly remembered you couldn't trust what any of them said when they were causing trouble. She leaned across the table and said to Araminta, "Is that true?" Araminta flushed even redder than Sarah Jane had earlier. "Is what true?" "What she just said. That you told them I was jealous." Araminta didn't answer. Bonnie rose to her feet. "Is it?" she demanded again. "Is it true? Is that what you said?" Again, Araminta took refuge in mumbling, "I've quite forgotten. I can't remember what I said at all." "You can't remember?" Bonnie leaned over the table. "Well, I did warn you. If you don't eat, your brain stops working properly." She picked up her plate. "What you need, Araminta, is a proper meal, and I've got one here for you." All Bonnie's fury and upset boiled up in her and boiled over. And before Araminta could even twist her head aside, Bonnie had slapped the lukewarm piece of pizza into her face and ground it round. Everyone squealed, and Araminta clawed at the dripping mess of cheese and tomato and onion. Her huge, shocked, saucer eyes peered out in horror like 2 rounds of pepperoni. "There!" Bonnie snapped. "Feeling any better?" And off she stomped in a foul temper out of the canteen and up the back stairs, all alone, back to charm school. Oh dear, I don't think Bonnie made a very good decision there, do you? Well, that's the end of the chapter, folks. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, commenting. It really makes my day when you do. Do subscribe to Dee at the Baby Patch, Mandy at Mandy's Cuddlebug Nursery, Renee at Renee's Reborn, Sam at Reborn Love Babies, and Seema at Seema's Dolls if you haven't already. And me and my cubs, When they're not sleeping, we'll see you soon for another story. Cheerio, folks.